Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Monday Motivation Spotlight. I'm Lesley Kaplan, welcoming you here every Monday for 30 minutes. As we said earlier, short, sweet, powerful, 30 minutes of motivation and inspiration, as well as highlighting special people, individuals, business owners, or amutot. This program and podcast, for those of you that are new for the first time, was started as a result of the war in order to motivate and inspire you, and at the same time to give exposures to others. We're also co-hosted by ACI. Thank you to ACI, who recognize the importance of this program. And thank you to our sponsor of the month, Lala's Flower Boutique in Jerusalem. So how do we work? You stay muted. You're free to share any questions, any information you have for our speaker. We'll introduce in just a moment via the chat. And although this is not a networking group, if you are a business owner, feel free to share your details in the chat. Once again, a very, very traumatic, unfortunately and sadly, week for Am Yisrael, which is all the more reason that we're here in order to inspire us and motivate us, and Am Yisrael Chai, and this is where we show our strength, that we bounce back. All right, so on that note, I'm going to be adding as a spotlight our guest for the day. And every week we have a special guest, and I know that I say this every week, but the truth is that is my aim and my job, to bring you special guests and special spotlights every week. So Linda Gradstein, Jerusalemite, who is known to many, many people, certainly to those who have joined here, I'm assuming. And we met a couple of years ago over a Shabbat table. That was the first time I met Linda. And then social media and in person, maybe a couple of times since then. So who is the Linda Gradstein? And she's going to share with us a lot of different things about her Aliyah story. Linda is a correspondent for the Voice of America and CBS Radio. She's also a restaurant reviewer. And I remember the first time we met, you were telling us about your reviewing of different wines. That's what I definitely remember from our first conversation. So she reviews for the Jerusalem Post. She's won several awards for her coverage. She has children living in Israel. And her fourth child, which she's going to share with us, has a falafel truck in Hawaii. So we were talking a bit about that before and how he jumped on a plane and came here at the start of the war. So Linda, please share with us, take away, inspire with us, and share anything that comes to mind. Take it away.
Okay, so I probably am unique of your speakers in that I actually made Aliyah from Egypt. And so I'm going to take you back I'm a little embarrassed to say how many years ago it was, maybe 35 years ago. And I spent a year living in Egypt, in Cairo. I won a Rotary Fellowship working on my Arabic. And in fact, I had guests for Shavuot who were friends of mine from that time in Cairo. As far as I know, we were the only three Shomrei Shabbat. They were a young couple. He was doing his PhD. I was a student. I was by myself, and we spent many Shabbatot together. And I got to Cairo in the summer, and I decided I had friends who actually Ellen Haber knows, Cindy and Steve Steinschreiber, who had come to Israel, were renting a place for the Chagim, and they invited me to come for Rosh Hashanah. Now, in order to understand this story, you need to know two things. One was, at the time, the Egyptian government didn't want foreign currency leaving Egypt. So you were only allowed to take out $100 at a time. So I only had $100. And the second thing you need to know is that Israel had just changed from the old shekel to the new shekel. So I wasn't quite sure how the money worked. Now, I was a student. I didn't have much money. So I decided, so I would take the bus back and forth to Israel. And so I took the bus. It was about a 14-hour bus ride. The interesting thing was, whenever I was scheduled to take the bus, somehow a taxi would miraculously appear right below my door at about 4 a.m, obviously sent by the Egyptian intelligence, but it was quite useful to be able to get to the bus stop. So anyway, after a 14-hour bus ride, I arrived in Israel, in Jerusalem, maybe, an hour and a half before Rosh Hashanah started. And I knew that I was going to have to, get a taxi. The buses had already stopped, and I get into the taxi and I said to the driver, do you mind waiting a minute? I just want to buy some flowers for my hosts. And he said, sure. And I got out and I bought a bouquet of flowers that I figured should cost $10 maybe. And I was so tired, I just said to the flower seller, just take whatever the money is. And I opened my wallet. I had at some point changed that $100 into shekels, and he took money. And I get into the cab and I opened my wallet and I saw that he had taken about $70. And I was left with $30 that was supposed to last me for the week that I was here. And it was just too much. And I just started to cry. And the taxi driver had already turned on the motor. You know, he's anxious to get home to his family. He said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "He took $70. And he turns off the motor. He says, "Ganav, thief." And he grabs the flowers out of my hand and he goes back to return the flowers for me as I sit sobbing in the backseat of the taxi. Now, the flower seller doesn't want to return it because it's almost Chag, and who else is going to buy them? And he charged me $70. So I hear yelling back and forth. And eventually the taxi driver gets my money back, but he doesn't just come back to the taxi. He goes across the street to another flower seller and buys me the bouquet of flowers for $10, comes back to the taxi, hands me the bouquet of flowers, hands me the money. The second flower seller followed him across the street to the taxi, hands me a single rose through the window and said, "Welcome to Israel," at which point I start sobbing all over again. And this poor taxi driver who just wants to get home to his family says, "Now what's the matter?" That's part one of the story. Part two, I get to my friend's house and I'm so happy to see them. And I wanted to daven at the kotel. Now, it used to be that you could actually light candles at the kotel. There used to be a place on the women's section that you could light candles. So we go to the kotel and I said, "I want to light candles at the kotel." And you can't do it anymore. I guess it was a fire hazard or something. So Jeff Seidel, who I understand is still there, who's this guy who kind of, sets people up. So, and it's now getting very close to candle lighting. So I said, or maybe a few minutes past candle lighting, I said, "Jeff, I need to light candles. What should I do?" And he said, "Oh, you see those, those fancy apartments overlooking the kotel?" He said, "Go to the second row, go down to, knock on the door and tell her I sent you." And so I do that and I knock on this random door, and this woman opens the door and I see that her table is beautifully set with china and with all kinds of fancy things. And I think, oh, she's probably having her family over, and I get a little bit homesick, and she's probably having her big family. And we were going to have, takeout chicken on paper plates and plastic forks. And I said, "May I light candles?" And she said, "Of course." And I lit candles and I go to the kotel to daven. And about 10 minutes later, I feel a tap on my shoulder and I turn around and it's this woman. And she said, "I am so sorry that I didn't invite you to join us. Please join us for dinner, for Rosh Hashanah dinner." And I said, "Oh, that's so nice of you, but I really have a place to go. I'm not by myself. I'm here with friends." And they had already lit, or they weren't with me with the candlelight. She said, "You must all come. I insist." And I said, "No, really." And she said, No, you came to my house for a reason. You must come." So we went, and this entire table with this beautiful china was all tourists and people passing through and students. And I said to myself, if I'm ever lucky enough to get married and have a family, I want to have a house like that. And, they say that everybody sort of connects to one mitzvah, like one thing that, and for me, it's hachnasat orchim. Now, it's hospitality, but hachnasat orchim is not having your friends over. Hachnasat orchim is having people who might be a little quirky, might, singles who might need a place, people who don't necessarily fit into the box. And so that was something I tried to do. Now, about 5 years ago, and we had lots of people. It changed a little bit during COVID, and it got a little harder as our kids got older. But we always had lots of different kinds of people. And I remember almost everyone. I have a pretty good memory for people. And I got a letter, and this woman wrote me an actual letter with a stamp, and she said, you probably don't remember me, but I was at your Shabbat table 5 years ago. And at the time I was contemplating suicide. And when I saw how you were with your husband and your kids, I realized that I needed help and I got therapy, and now I'm getting married and I just wanted to thank you. And I thought, you never know how one little thing, and I can't remember her. That's the other thing. I have no idea who this woman is. And I just feel very privileged to, have shared a little bit in whatever journey she was on. Now I want to fast forward to a couple of weeks ago. I was in Japan. I just came back from a wonderful trip to Japan, where in fact I met Clara, who's on this call. And I fell in love with Japan, and I'm figuring out a way to teach journalism and to go back, and it's just an amazing, amazing country. But I actually have a Japanese friend who's a journalist I was on a journalism fellowship in Stanford, and I found her, and so we met up, and she was coming with us to the Meiji Shrine in Tokyo, and you walk through a forest to get to the shrine. And walking through the forest next to me are two young Israeli guys. So of course you start talking. And then afterwards, and we're talking the whole time, and she said to me, "That's so funny that you met somebody you know." And I said, "Oh, I don't know them." And she said, "But you talked to them." And I said, "Yeah, of course I talked to them. They're Israelis." And she said, "Japanese people would never do that. You would never talk to somebody that you don't know." And I think that in some ways, Japanese culture is kind of 180 degrees different from Israeli culture. It's all about not taking up too much space in the public sphere, but you don't have those connections that you have here when you're automatically an Israeli. I'm a journalist, as Lesley said, and I really see journalism as a big privilege. They talk about journalism being the first draft of history. And one of the most challenging things as a journalist, and then I'll move on to talk about food a little bit. One of the challenging things is something called vox pop, man, which is from Latin, I guess, man on the street interviews. Now, in some places, I actually almost got myself arrested in Jordan because I took out my microphone and started asking people on the street what they thought about something. And then the security came up to me and said, "You're not allowed to do this." In Israel, it's very easy to do. You just go to Aroma, order a coffee, sit down at a table, and within 5 minutes, you've got a great political argument starting. And I think that one of the great things about living here is that it really is one family. It might be a dysfunctional family, but it's one family in a way. My kids grew up thinking that strangers are somebody you ask for help if your bike breaks when you're at the park. There's almost no violent crime here. And especially now when, we've had 8 months of war, and many of us have children who have been fighting. And of course, this week was just horrible in terms of the, number of people killed, but yet it's actually a very safe place to live. And, you can, have your kids walk around. You're not afraid. Your children here have a freedom that they don't have before. Now I'm going to segue into food. I just thought of a way to do this, which is that when we would go to a restaurant when our kids were young, my daughter, who is now a pharmacist doing clinical drug trials at Hadassah, would interview people, and she, didn't want to make a bad decision. And she would go around and say, "What did you order? No, she would say very politely first, "May I ask you a question?" And she would say, "What did you order? What did you like about it? Should I order that? I really want to know what to order." And half the time she would end up eating with this random family because they were a lot more fun and interesting than her own family. And I would always go over and say, come back to the table. And they would almost always say, "No, leave her here. She's adorable. She's so cute." And so there's this there's no filters and no boundaries in Israel. I think both for the good and sometimes not always for the good. But it's just, you live in this place where there is no such thing as a stranger. So in terms of food, that's definitely the best part of my job. I have to say that I have been a journalist for many, many years, but people get much more excited about the food than anything else. We all love food. I always like hearing the stories of the restaurant and the chef as well as the food itself. And after now I've done this for, I don't know, maybe 3-4 years. I actually don't remember how I started. As Lesley mentioned, I actually know more about wine than I know about food, but don't tell anyone. That'll be just between us. And the Israeli food scene is really taking off, both in Israel and abroad. And Israeli food, now it's become very politicized, obviously, but until the war in Gaza, Israeli food was taking off like gangbusters. Ayal Shani, who has the Miznon, which just opened a kosher brand. She has mostly non-kosher restaurants. I interviewed him once for an article. He's crazy, but he's a genius. And he just opened a Miznon in Times Square that you can't get reservations for, with lines out the door. And, you know, I'm on all these different foodie groups. In Israel, the restaurant business is tough. And if, in a minute, I'll talk about my son. As anybody, I don't know if anyone here is in the restaurant business, but it's a tough one. And something like half of restaurants close within the first year. Now, I think that most restaurants have food that goes between good and excellent. If the food isn't good or very good, it's not going to last at all. And so much of it is not only the service, but the vibe. How do you feel when you go there? For example, there's a restaurant in Jerusalem called Super HaMizrach that is a cute little thing because it looks like a supermarket and then the back door moves aside. And they opened at the beginning of the war. And they are packed every night. And the food is I think the food is very good. The sushi's good, but it's just like a fun place to hang out. And so I think I try to, as much as I can, sort of highlight new restaurants and individually owned restaurants rather than chains. Although if you read my review last week, when I was invited to the terrace bar at the Waldorf Astoria, I did not say no, which is the outdoor rooftop bar. And that was a lot of fun. I think that I think that, you know, we all have this kind of feeling, should we be going to restaurants? Should we, you know, how can you do this when there's a war going on in Gaza? And one of my sons, Netanel, who's 23, this was his first Miluim in Gaza. And I have a WhatsApp group of girlfriends called Ladies Who Drink. We each have a different specialty. Mine is wine, somebody else's is cocktails, somebody else's is whiskey. And I had everybody over for Purim. And, you know, it's always like, you know, how can you celebrate Purim during a war? How can you, I think now people have sort of like come to terms with it, but then it really wasn't easy. And you know, Netanel, who's kind of an emotion, you know, very emotional, he stood up and he had just gotten out of Gaza, or he might have been in between, you know, he was home for a few days. And he said, the reason that we're in Gaza is so that you can celebrate Purim. So don't feel bad, and you should enjoy it and you should celebrate. Which brings me to my other older son, Uriel. My youngest, I have a daughter and 3 sons, which is why in my reviews, I often talk about my favorite daughter. I also highly recommend having the daughter first. That's always a very good way to start. And she was, you know, babysitting by the time she was like, I don't know, 9 years old. She loved bossing her brothers around. And my youngest is a technician on the Iron Dome, the radar of the Iron Dome. And he's stationed near Eilat, where it is very, very hot. And he sent me a little video of his room. He actually sleeps on a truck, apparently. But they've got a whole gaming system set up. So it might be on a truck, but they can play video games. And, you know, they're all, you know, kind of geeky kids who like games. And he seems quite happy. And my oldest son, Uriel, is 27. If anyone has a nice Jewish daughter who wants to live in Hawaii, let me know. And Uriel was in the paratroopers. He was a Chovesh Kravi, a combat medic. And there are certain units that really like lone soldiers, and the paratroopers is one of them. And so he had a friend named Josh, who actually also came back for the war and became our lone soldier. But at the time, I didn't really know him. And Josh's parents go between California and Hawaii. So after they finished the army, Uriel went to work in a summer camp in New York. And one day Josh calls him and says, I'm flying to Hawaii to visit my parents. Do you want to come? And Uriel bought a one-way ticket. And that was 5 years ago. And it was a great place to be for COVID because the island was open within the island, but closed to anyone from outside. So he went surfing with the mayor every day. And he's in Kauai, which is the northernmost island. And it's beautiful. They call it the Garden Island. It's very, very green. And after a while, he decided, my son Uriel, to open up a falafel food truck, which is called Shakalafel. Shaka is this, which means, sababa kind of. And he did it without his cousin was supposed to do it with him. And when he moved to Hawaii, it didn't quite work. And he's got a falafel food truck in Kauai. And Kauai has this, there's only 80,000 people who live there, has this kind of hippie vegan vibe, and it's stunningly beautiful. And the contrast between the blue waters and the volcanic rock, it's all, based from a volcano, and the green, just the colors are amazing. And the amount of water, that was actually something that I found in Japan too. So I think that when and I think I thought about this a little bit after I went to Japan. Which is normal, we're so focused on the war and on, especially those of us who have children involved in this, but the entire country is focused on the war. And there's a whole world out there. And you sometimes forget that there's something beyond here. And at the same time, I wouldn't live anywhere else. Israelis, native Israelis often say to me, why are you here? Why don't you go back? Or especially since the war, did you think of going back? And it never entered my mind. My son Uriel, the one in Hawaii, has done, in 5 years, he did 1 day of Miluim. He happened to be here once on a visit when they had some shooting exercise, and he did 1 day of Miluim, but he kept in touch with his commanders. When the war started, he jumped on a plane and he got here the next day, the day after the war. And he was wearing pink shorts and he came with nothing. He came with a little gym bag with 3 pairs of underwear and a couple of t-shirts. And he said to me, I thought I'd be here for a week. And he was here for almost 4 months. And after he brought his phone and he has cameras set up for his business. So he's sitting on the Lebanese border, monitoring what's going on with his falafel business in Hawaii. And after 3.5 months, he said to his mifaked, my business is really going down. I really need to get back. And in any case, his unit was supposed to be released in the next couple of weeks. So then he went back to Hawaii. His unit is now back in the north. And he said to me, well, when there's a war, then I'll come back. But so at one point I had all 3 boys in. Now I just have 1. But I think that I really feel like it's a privilege to live here. And I'm just very happy about, the sort of, you always wonder, your life could have taken a different direction. You could have done something else. You make a decision that sort of pushes you one way. And I just feel like and people say all the time, well, why do you live in Israel? And I have a very simple answer, which is the future of the Jewish people is here. It's not in New York. It's not anywhere else. And I think that when you live, any place you live, and I'm really not saying that everybody has to come to Israel, although that would be nice. You can make a difference by what you do in the world, by your family, by, trying to be a good person and trying to help people and trying to whatever. In Israel, just by living here, by the very fact of living here, you're already making a difference before you do anything. Just by living here. And so I wonder, because so my oldest son, is in Hawaii. I'm hoping he'll come back. He says he wants to raise his children in Israel, to which I say, where are you going to meet someone with whom to raise these theoretical children? Because I don't know that it's going to happen in Hawaii, but one never knows. And now my second son, who's 23, who actually had gone to Hawaii when he finished the army, and then came back, was here actually when the war started. And he's now kind of getting ready to start to travel and to do other things. And it's very different because I made the choice to come to okay. Good. Let's do it, Toby. Toby has a shidduch for my son. I'm interested. I don't know if
Good, you
he,
see,
we'll
there
see.
was a reason you were on the show.
That's
if
right.
you get a
That's why I'm
shidduch
on.
from it.
Believe me, if the shidduch comes out of this, he's also extremely good looking. And has a lot of confidence. He said, Mom, I have game. I don't need you to set me up. Although I do have one story, which was very funny. He said he was here for a visit and he's very into working out and whatever. And he was at Ramat Rachel and he saw a pretty girl go into the jacuzzi. So he ran in, put on his bathing suit to kind of talk to her. And by the time he got to the jacuzzi, she was gone. So he said he spent an hour in the jacuzzi hoping she would come back, but she didn't come back. Anyway, he's, so I really, and I'm also, by the way, this is completely not connected to Israel, but I am quoted in a book called Words on Fire by Vanessa Oakes about women learning Torah from many, many years ago, saying that I'm never going to have children because I'm going to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict single-handedly, by the way. So the fact that there's no peace is my fault, my husband Cliff's fault, and our children's fault. But I just feel like, and I made the decision to come here, and now my kids see Israel sometimes as somewhat limiting. And they made the decision they want to at least try life abroad or, for a while. But the fact that they both came back, well, one was visiting anyway, but and had no hesitations about, joining Miluim, and the fact that my son Uriel said, whatever financial losses I'm gonna suffer because of it, it doesn't matter. I'm hoping that that means that my theoretical grandchildren, which don't exist yet, will be living in Israel and not abroad.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And firstly, Linda, I love your story and the way it started off. And it's so true in the fact that, Israel's not for everyone, but Israel, even during a war, has a quality of life that is very, very difficult to explain to someone who is not living here. And, we don't judge anyone that chose to leave during the war or that didn't come back or whatever it was. But there is something about being in this club of living in Israel that for an outsider, they just don't understand it. And, despite the tragedies and the challenges that we've had, we're also starting to see, and we'll see in the coming months, a big aliyah of people because of the, the way it's spread out and anti-Semitism. I don't know if you want to just comment on anything, just one thing regarding that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I also teach I teach journalism at NYU Tel Aviv, which is a very small program. And what's been going on college campuses, a couple of my students actually wrote stories about it. They actually started the semester here in August with me and then left after October 7th. But I think that Jewish students just don't feel safe in the US, and it's frightening. I mean, I wonder whether this sort of wave of anti-Semitism was always there, and it just, we didn't know it, we didn't see it. And it is frightening. And, it just, I think it is going to cause an increase in Aliyah. But
yeah,
I also
most
think
definitely. I know of already one family who had no intention of making Aliyah that has already now started the ball rolling.
And the whole thing of Aliyah is quite amazing. All of the because I made Aliyah from Egypt, so I didn't make Aliyah for quite a long time because I worked as a journalist, and so I didn't become a citizen for a long time. But the fact what the Nefesh B'Nefesh, these other organizations, the financial help, the emotional help, it's
unbelievable. Right, I fully agree with you. So, ladies and gents, because I'm not sure if we have any gents in the room here, but certainly there are some that will be watching the recording. We've come to an end of another Monday Motivation Spotlight. As I said, short, sweet, and powerful, 30 minutes of inspiration. And Linda, you were definitely an entertaining and inspiring guest. Thank you so much. So before you log off, I just want to say thank you again to our co-hosts. I'm Lesley Kaplan, co-hosted by ACI. Thanks to our sponsors, Lali's Flower Boutique in Jerusalem. Next week, ladies or gents, although part of it's for the ladies, we have a double event. So please make sure you save it in your calendar. Block off from 9 until 11. We have, starting from our Monday Motivation, where our guest is Henny Shaw, the kitchen coach Cooking in the Kitchen with Henny Shaw. She's our guest for the Monday Motivation Spotlight. And then we move on to the Professional Women's Networking Forum, which is a monthly event, but next week happens to be the monthly event where we're doing a joint event, a panel where I'm going to be sharing and talking and joining with Andy Seitovitz and with Daphne Horowitz. So make sure that you join us. Thank you again for joining the Monday Motivation Spotlight. Thank you again, Linda. It was fabulous hosting you. I'm Israel Chai, and may we only know peace and Bissel Have a great, safe day. Amen.